This morning we examined chapter 2, which is a creation story. I think I was saying something about the origin of this material as being in an oral form, passed on by word of mouth. So you can imagine taking out chapter 2 from the Bible and hearing it being told by groups of people. This is our story of creation. And then it finds its way into this compilation, which is the book of Genesis. And it is preceded by a more recent story of creation, a more solemn story, which is chapter 1. But chapter 2 brings with it, because it's not just creation, is it? It brings with it another story. And somehow these two stories have been connected, clipped together by that reference to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Once we read those verses, we thought, this is going to go somewhere. It hasn't got somewhere yet. So we need to go into chapter 3, which is going to develop that reference. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is going to come into its own. So this story in chapter 3, which obviously is not a creation story, I would say it's a story of the loss of the garden. Paradise lost. Prepared for by 16 and 17 about the trees in the garden. Prepared for also with the final statement of chapter 2. They were naked, but they were not ashamed. Whoever wrote that line knew what it was to be ashamed. So this story is going to tell us about the loss of God. And we might ask ourselves, well, just as we had with creation, are there any stories in the ancient East which tell us about the loss of God's garden? And the answer to that is, well, not really that we know of. They may come to light in fresh excavations, even though the time of excavation seems to be over with all the violence in Nineveh and all these kind of places. Excavation, I don't think, is prospering as it was in the 19th and 20th centuries. But of course, the stories about human beings and the world, the stories which try to answer our questions, try to take up the question mark in the heart of man and woman. These stories don't only come from the ancient Near East. There is a wonderful collection edited by Barbara Sproul, S-P-R-O-U-L, Barbara Sproul. The collection, which is many years old but still available, is called Primal Myths. In other words, stories about the questions you ask. And they come from all over the world. They come from Africa, they come from South America, they come from Oceania, from Asia, from all over. There is in this collection a story from the Yao people of northern Mozambique. The story begins with the creator god, Mulungu. I think Mulungu is Bantu for God. Mulungu. So there was Mulungu and the decent, peaceful beasts. And this story tells of the creation of man and woman. And man and woman make fire. And the animals have to run away to escape the flames. And Mulungu says, they're burning everything. They're killing my people. All the beasts run away to the forest, as far away from mankind as they can get. The spider spins a rope for Mulungu, and Mulungu climbs the rope and goes to live in the sky. And the story ends, thus were the gods driven off the face of the earth by the cruelty of man. So while the Yao story has God flee from man's world and what man has made of the world, the Eden story has man and woman driven from the perfect, beautiful garden that God gave them. Both cases, human beings and God become separated. Chapter 3 begins with a classic statement. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. More crafty, more cunning. So what is it about snakes? It's a wonderful choice of character. But what is it about snakes? Jesus says, be wise as serpents. The snake appears in various contexts in ancient mythology. The one that I think is most helpful to us is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a very well-known story which made a huge stir when it emerged in the 19th century, because Gilgamesh contains the story of the flood. And the story of the flood is very, very similar to the story of the flood in Genesis with Noah. But Gilgamesh is about more than the flood. The main point of the epic is the quest for immortality. Remember, human beings are not immortal. This will be relevant later on. We are not immortal. God might give us immortality. So Gilgamesh has a friend called Enkidu. And Enkidu dies. And Gilgamesh is determined to discover the secret of immortality. And he's told to go to visit Utnapishtim. And Utnapishtim has survived the flood. So Utnapishtim tells him the story of the flood, and also how to gain immortality. Because Utnapishtim, having survived the flood, seems to be going to be given immortality by the gods. He tells Gilgamesh, there is a plant, a thorny plant of wondrous power. He tells Gilgamesh where he can get hold of it. The bottom of the sea. So Gilgamesh dives to the bottom of the sea and gets the plant, brings it up, travels on the plant. It's a hot day, and he sees this pool, and he says, I could do with a dip. And he has a dip. And while he's in the pool, a serpent steals the plant. And that's what makes the serpent immortal. We all know that serpents are immortal because they throw off their skin and they get new skin. They go on forever, don't they? Snakes. It's possibly true of various cultures consider that serpents are immortal. Anyway, isn't it extraordinary? So the serpent in Genesis 3, first of all, the serpent speaks, which is just one of those devices that fables and myths, these kind of stories were used. There's only one other time where an animal speaks, which is of course the ass belonging to the seer Balaam, Numbers 22, where Balaam's donkey is given the gift of speech. So he says to Balaam, "Why are you beating me?" Because he can see that there's an angel with a sword in front of them, barring their way, and Balaam's determined to carry on. "What have I done to you? Why are you beating me?" says the donkey. Anyway, back to the snake. The snake, in that initial dialogue, suggests the possibility of not doing as God says. You think, well, this suggestion or this possibility has to come from somewhere and has to be enunciated by someone. So the story, it's the snake, this mysterious creature which has this power over life and death, or is certainly a creature more crafty than any other of the animals that God has made. So what's going on? This is a creature of God. He's going to suggest disaster. Yes, you really want this disaster, don't you? Does God have a plan? If human beings follow the suggestion of the snake, has God got a plan B? Anyway, the first question of the snake to the woman. She's the one leading the events, really. Did God really say you can't eat from the trees of the garden? Oh no! Oh no! We can eat from any of the trees, except we can't eat from that particular tree. Because if we even touch it, we eat it, nor shall we touch it, because we'll die. And the serpent says, "Oh, no, don't believe that. You would not die. God knows that if you eat that fruit, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So there's all this sort of deception going on, and half-truths and incomplete truths. But the snake basically is saying, and is this the voice of the woman reflecting on, "Why on earth can't we have that fruit? It looks so nice. Can't be anything wrong in eating that fruit. Maybe God doesn't want, maybe God's afraid of that it might tell us something. We might learn something." How do we explain all this? Well, I don't know how we explain it. I'm not surprised that it's a snake that makes the suggestion. But what does that mean? Where does the idea of the possibility of sin, temptation, where does it come from? Of course, Genesis 3 says nothing about sin. It doesn't mention the word sin. But, go to Genesis 4, the story of Cain and Abel, there it is. Cain's offering has been refused by God. We don't know why. Abel's offering has been accepted. So Cain is not pleased. And God says to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. Once again, we're not told where sin, temptation, comes from. It's a mysterious presence, the possibility of evil, which should be resisted. Both in chapter 3 and in chapter 4, it is not resisted. What is the knowledge of good and evil? I think it's very easy for us with those words to think, oh, it's what is good, what is bad, what is morally good, what is morally bad. But the concepts of tov, good, and ra, in Hebrew, evil, are much broader than that. So tov includes what is good, what is righteous, but also pleasure, happiness, fulfillment, while ra includes pain, suffering, loss. So man is faced with the opportunity of gaining this knowledge without knowing what this knowledge will bring. Man has to choose. Woman has to choose. But the origin of this is unknown. Where does evil come from? We can't say it comes from God. Though I could upset you by saying there's a verse hidden in the book of Isaiah which refers to God as the one who creates tov and ra. Means that he creates good and evil. Everything is from God. But believers have always struggled with the idea that evil could come from God. God's created everything good. Just read Genesis 1. It was all tov, and tov ma'od, very good. That's all God does. God doesn't do ra. And we say, well, God allows ra. God allows evil. Classic theology. Verse 6 invites us into the mind of the woman. The woman saw the tree was good for food. It was a delight to the eyes. She thought, I've got to have some of this. And I've got to give Adam some of this. So, like a good wife, she's making the decision for her future, for her family. So she took the fruit and ate it. And she said, here, have some. And he eats as well. And what does it say, verse 7? Their eyes were opened. They knew that they were naked. Doesn't say they were ashamed, but that's the implication. They were naked but not ashamed, said the last verse of chapter 2. They were naked, and they quickly sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. So this new knowledge, because that's what it's presented as, the knowledge of good and evil, this new knowledge brings shame. They try to cover up. In a moment they'll try to hide. And then we have this most beautiful verse. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze. The expression in Hebrew is lo ruach hayom. Literally in the wind of the day, or the spirit of the day, or the cool of the day, I think is the wonderful thing. The cool of the evening. I can't think of this verse without remembering Matthew's Passion. So Matthew's Passion, and there is a bass recitative. Am Abend, da es kühle war, ward Adams Fallen offenbar. In the evening, as it was cool, the fall of Adam was revealed. And this goes on to speak of the evening as the beautiful time of redemption. It's the time when the dove came back to the ark. Beautiful time, the evening hour. So the evening as the time of Adam's sin being revealed, the evening as the time of Christ completing his journey into death. It's just, anyway, it's not in Genesis, but it's inspired by Genesis. You can't pass by the image of God walking in the cool of the evening without marveling at the beauty of a portrayal of God who needs to cool off and who can enjoy the beautiful things of his own creation. We need to get back. So the man and the woman hide from God. They've tried to put these fig leaves together, and now they hide from God among the trees in the garden. And God says, "Where are you? I was afraid because I was naked and I hid." Who told you you were naked? Have you been eating the tree from which I told you not to eat? 9, 10, and 11. And then we get the blame game. It was the woman you gave me. It's your fault. You gave me this woman and she gave me the fruit. And the woman said, "No, it was the serpent. He tricked me. It's not fair. It's not me, it's the serpent. It's not me, it's my wife. It's nothing but me. It can never be me." Jonathan Sacks says, the first human instinct is denial. The man blames the woman. We hear for the first time a proposition that has undergone many transformations, but always with the same conclusion. I'm not responsible. I'm not to blame. So, what then happens? After this, we have several verses which seem to list the consequences of the sin. We're dealing with from 14 all the way down to 19. The actual consequence of the sin, if we try and imagine this story, you've disobeyed the one rule, you leave the garden. And that's what happens at the end of the chapter, verse 23. They're expelled from the garden. But before that, we have this enormous proliferation of punishment, which is completely out of order, given that all they did was have a bite of an apple. But this is the statement that this story makes. Somehow, pain, suffering, lost have come into the world. They've come into the world not from God's action, but from human action. Can't explain it in any other way. And the Bible will demonstrate from this point onwards how human actions do cause pain and do cause loss, as well as being capable of enormous goodness. So what we have from verse 14, you notice, 14 to 19, you notice it goes into poetic form. And there are those who say, well, these are additions to the basic story. It doesn't really matter what we think about that. But we have speeches of God to the three protagonists, to the serpent, to the woman, and to the man, spelling out the consequences of sin. Human collusion with evil has changed things. The consequences of this transgression are now listed. So first of all, the words to the serpent. Because you have done this, cursed are you among all animals and among all wild creatures. Upon your belly you shall go and eat dust all the days of your life. So the serpent gets punished. Strange idea. Well, why does the serpent move on his belly? Why hasn't the serpent got legs like all the other creatures? No, because of this, because of what he has done. The most important part of the words to the serpent come in verse 13. I will put enmity between you, serpent, and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. Now, what is spoken here is an antagonism between the snake, the serpent, and the future serpents, and the woman and her offspring. There is perpetual enmity between these two. That's what the text says. But Christian interpretation, I think it is, I'm not sure whether there be any kind of Jewish interpretation which uses this, has looked to the victory of humanity, of human beings, over the forces of evil symbolized by the serpent. And this text, this very verse, was used in the 2nd century by St. Justin and St. Irenaeus to speak of the triumph over evil won by the Messiah. So this verse is known as the Proto-Evangelium, the first announcement of the good news, the first gospel. If you read it in Genesis, it simply talks about enmity between the woman and her offspring, and the snake and its offspring. But what Christian piety has read into it is this victory, which is the victory fundamentally of Christ. So how is it read? These scriptures are translated into Greek. When they're translated into Greek, so this what leads me to think, well, perhaps this is pre-Christian as well, where the text says, he will strike your head, talking to the serpent. He will strike your head. He will strike your head. And this is interpreted as being the Messiah. So the descendant of the woman who will strike the serpent is the Messiah. And it's understood to be a messianic prophecy of the victory of the Messiah over the serpent, over evil. When it gets into the Latin Vulgate, it's even more strange, because the Latin has it, not it, but she. She will strike your head, and you will strike at her heel, suggesting a reference to Mary as the mother of the Messiah. And just even to speak of those two things, those two interpretations, shows you how this particular scripture has been made the basis of new truths, or understood as pointing to new truths. If it talks about the struggle between human beings and the forces of evil, you can understand how people would want to draw out of that the idea of the victory of the human being, Christ, of his mother Mary, over the forces of evil. But it is an extraordinarily important verse in early Christianity. Christians, after all, were looking in the scriptures for texts which prepared for what Christ did, which they will then present as being fulfilled in Christ. What the text actually says in Genesis is limited, but what it says to the people of God, because of the power of God's word, is much more. Those are the words to the serpent. The words to the woman are much easier to understand. I will increase your pangs in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he will rule over you. So that the negative consequences of sin are seen in this context of childbearing and of the dominion of husband over wife. These are things which didn't happen before sin. These are things which are seen as a result of sin, not part of the good world that God has created. And then if we look at 17 to 19, the words to the man, because, much more solemn, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree about which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. It's an extraordinary statement. But the thing is, these people knew that the ground was cursed, but there were places where nothing would grow. How does that come about? Because God created a good world. It has to be because of sin. So it's explained now as being part of the consequence of sin, the sin of our first parents. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. And then, not content with that, let's elaborate it a bit more. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Sin transforms human life. And there's no bones about it. It's made very, very clear. The final verses, final verse and the final half verse of that is interesting, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated. According to Genesis, what are the consequences of the sin? The snake is punished, okay, but the woman, suffering comes into the life of the woman. Toil and hardship come into the life of the man who had enjoyed looking after the garden and now finds it much harder. The ground is cursed. There are thorns and thistles. And presumably, someone reflecting on this would and so much else in human experience which should be attributed to the effect of sin. By the sweat of your face you shall eat your bread, until you return to the ground from which you were taken. In time, this text will be interpreted as saying, at this point, because of this, Genesis says, man is no longer immortal. Death comes into the world. But it's not what Genesis says. Because Genesis does not have a concept of immortality, it has a concept of the limited life of the human being. So your life will be transformed, it will be changed, it will be more difficult, and will come to an end when you return to the ground from which you came. I want to underline this by reminding ourselves that for most of the Hebrew Scriptures, man is considered to be mortal, destined to die, and there is only a fleeting reflection on the possibility of immortality. This is demonstrated quite significantly in the book of Job. Job chapter 14. Man born of woman has a short life, it has his fill of sorrow. He blossoms, he withers like a flower, fleeting as a shadow, transient. And then later on in the chapter, there's always hope for a tree. When felled, it can start its life again. Its shoots continue to sprout. Its roots may be decayed in the earth, but its stump may be withering in the soil, but then it's sent the water and it buds again and puts out branches like a plant new set. But man, he dies. Lifeless he remains. He breathes his last, and then where is he? So the concept that human life has its number of years comes to an end. And that is the concept which is found in the background to Genesis chapter 3. So your life will be transformed. Your life will be more difficult because of sin. And it's as if you will be relieved from that life when you return to the dust from which you came. Now, many centuries after the book of Genesis, in the book of Wisdom, we have this statement. It is by the envy of the devil that death entered the world. The envy of the devil, diabolos, that death entered the world. We witness in the centuries coming up to Christ and beyond a reinterpretation, a rereading of Genesis, in which, for a start, the serpent is understood to be Satan. And Satan is the one who's blamed for everything, the one who brings into the world sin and also death. Now, this is, I said from the start, we're struggling with these issues. And we still don't know where evil comes from. We say it's from Satan. That's particular. Everybody knows Satan brings death and sin into the world. Does that explain sin? It does, to some extent. We're still in the face of a mystery. Satan in the Bible. Satan's not a bad bloke. Job chapter 1, we're introduced to Satan. Satan means the accuser. He's the one that's in the court of God and that says to God, you know that bloke Job, do you think he's so good? Well, I don't know, I think it's only surface goodness. Because he's talking to God. I'm paraphrasing. And he says, if you let me do a few things to him, you'll find he's not as good as you think. So this is Satan. It's what Satan does. He's the accuser. Troublemaker. Hey, Diabolos, Satan. And of course this figure of Satan is very convenient to explain things that we can't explain. Now I'm not arguing I'm not saying Satan is not real, because plenty of popes recently have said Satan is real. And I say to that, I am sure evil is real. You can't watch Channel 4 News night after night and say evil is not real. Evil is absolutely real. If you saw it last night, the dreadful pictures of the child lost her leg because of the Turkish bomb. Just one example. Most of it we can't cope with. So evil is present, and it is our tradition to say evil comes from the spirit of evil, Satan, the devil. Perfectly okay with that. And that's what we are trying to fight, not to succumb to. So Satan is the joke, a couple of other Old Testament books, but then around about the time of Jesus later on, there's a work called The Life of Adam and Eve. Reflection on Adam and Eve, which develops, what happened to Adam and Eve afterwards? Because all Genesis says, well, they're thrown out of the garden. Well, what happened afterwards? And we hear how they go through the waterless country and say, oh, wish we were back in Eden. We shouldn't have eaten of that fruit. We could have had, all the pomegranates we had and all those wonderful animals, and God was there, was lovely. And they start blaming each other. I'm exaggerating. But in this story of the life of Adam and Eve, there is Satan figures. And Satan explains what happened. Because Satan, of course, is the snake at that stage. And he says, well, I was really, expression I can't use, I was really annoyed because God created human beings in the image of God. And then the Archangel Michael said, here, Satan, you've got to worship the image of God in the man and the woman. And I wasn't going to do that, says Satan. You see? So Satan then is jealous of the position of human beings. He could not tolerate that man was made in the image of God and therefore superior to Satan. So he tempted man. He said, I'm going to fix them. And sure enough, he succeeded in getting them thrown out of Eden. And then he himself was also expelled from God's presence. So this is the kind of reflection that's going on in story in the first century AD probably, the life of Adam and Eve. So if you want to know more about Adam and Eve, which is completely apocryphal in every sense, then look for the life of Adam and Eve. Those developments that say this, what happened in Eden, was from Satan and brought about sin and death, are a development of Jewish and indeed of Christian faith. How does Genesis 3 finish? After that dialogue, we have the actual concluding verses 20 to 24. First of all, tidbits of information. The man named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all who live. Hava means the living one. She's life. And then verse 21. Once again, God portrayed as being involved with the things of human life. Lord God made garments of skins for the man and his wife. He said, wow, those fig leaves are quite inadequate, you know. So he makes garments of skins. and clothes them. And then 22, 23, there is this further fear that God has. The man has become one of us, knowing good and evil. What does that mean? And I don't want him to reach out his hand and take from the tree of life and eat and live forever. Remember, there was that other tree, the tree of life, which hasn't been mentioned from the time it was introduced in chapter 2. So they mustn't have the tree of life. All of these verses are so powerful and suggestive that you could do with reflecting on them. So he drove out the man. So the loss of the garden of God. You were placed in the garden. You did not obey the rules of the garden. You lose the garden of God. And at the east of the garden he placed the cherubim and a sword flaming and turning to guard the way to the tree of life. So you can't have what's not yours. You can't have what God has not yet given to you. What I want to do now, in conclusion, before we have time for questions, is to attempt some kind of evaluation of this chapter in particular in relation to sin and original sin. This chapter clearly states that God gives us rules for good, and disobedience to those rules means that we act against ourselves. We bring about pain and suffering for ourselves and for others. The eating of the forbidden fruit is a symbol of humanity striving for what is beyond it, what is not allowed, what is not for its good. So we have a knowledge which we weren't meant to have. That's the way we interpret it. You might say, well, I wonder whether God actually planned it. He knew that we would be unable to resist this special secret knowledge. But he had a trick up his sleeve for helping us when we needed it. So the action of the human couple is considered to be going beyond the boundaries. That's what sin is. Original sin, originally that means the sin at the beginning. The sin of the beginning. What are the consequences for humanity of original sin? Well, if we look at Genesis, the opening chapters, opening 11 chapters, they demonstrate how sin spreads, proliferates. And there are consequences. And so it means that human beings are born into a world where sin is thriving. We therefore need help. We need what the Bible calls salvation or redemption. We need to be bought, freed of our slavery. And it's obvious that later scriptures, so if we're saying that the book of Genesis, this material of Genesis, even chapter 1 is probably exilic time, 6th century. Chapters 2 and 3 are possibly much older. But as those scriptures are put together after the exile in Babylon, we get further reflection and we get the kind of material that's written down about the time of Jesus or before. The book of Ecclesiasticus. From the woman came the beginning of sin, and because of her we all die. Don't take that as sexist. Because most of the time it's about Adam. The apocryphal fourth book of Ezra, chapter 7. Adam, what have you done? For though it was you who sinned, the fall was not yours alone, but ours also, who are your descendants. The second book of Baruch, this is another apocalypse, 100 AD. Adam, what did you do to all who were born after you? Everybody's frustrated with that. Why did you do it? And then, although Adam sinned first and has brought death upon all who were not in his own time, yet each of them who has been born from him has prepared for himself the coming torment. Adam is not the cause, except only for himself. But each of us has become our own Adam. So they're reflecting on how on earth can we be responsible for the sin of Adam? I'm not responsible for the sin of Adam. I can't be. Wasn't around. Yeah, but maybe he's opened the gates to sin and to corruption and all those things. But each of you has been his own Adam. Just to sort of illustrate that, the wonderful book of the prophet Ezekiel, so written in the time of the exile, 6th century BC, talks about the king of Tyre. Tyre and Sidon, the Lebanon coast. And it says, you were in Eden, the garden of God. Your behavior was exemplary from the day of your creation, until the day evil was first found in you. This could have been said to Adam, and he's saying it to the king of Tyre. Your busy trading has filled you with violence and sin. Business, trading, banking, all a source of sin. I've thrown you down from the mountain of God, and the guardian cherub has destroyed you from amid the coals. Your heart grew swollen with pride on account of your beauty. You have corrupted your wisdom owing to your splendor. I have thrown you to the ground. I have made you a spectacle for the other kings. I've thrown you out of Eden because you don't deserve to be in Eden. So he was Adam for himself. Each of us can be our own Adam. We might say each of us is our own Adam, or if you like, our own Eve. So what is it in the church that we say, set him free, set her free from original sin? What does that mean? It's very clear in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Remember, this is a improved and revised version of Catholic faith explanations around Catholic dogma, which came out in the pontificate of Pope John Paul II. Although it is proper to each individual, original sin does not have the character of a personal fault in any of Adam's descendants. It is a deprivation of original holiness and justice. But human nature has not been totally corrupted. On one hand. On the other hand, I'm not responsible for original sin, but original sin, in other words, I would say the entry of sin into the world and the proliferation of sin has an effect on me and puts me in danger. And that's why baptism is opening me up to another way, to the way of grace, the way of Christ, the way of life, the way of resurrection. Okay. Felix culpa. Felix culpa. I am not this afternoon by any means, or perhaps perhaps not in my lifetime, going to explain these things to my satisfaction or to anybody's satisfaction. There are things that we can grasp hold of and say, isn't this interesting? Because when we look at Adam and Eve, we may be the kind of person who wants a quiet life and enjoys living in Gideon Park, whatever. We might say to ourselves, it'd be wonderful just to be in the garden, come to the end of our lives and return to the earth from which we came. But that's not the hand we've been dealt. We've been dealt a much more, I would think, challenging and demanding existence, with all those questions, with this big question mark in our heart. And if we reflect from the perspective of the whole of Scripture, from the New Testament, on what did this lead to? And would we rather rewind and start again from not eating the apple? We might say, not really. I often think, it's a personal reminiscence, God, isn't it wonderful I'm as old as I am? You don't really want to start again, do you? You want to go forward. Okay, you can delete that from the official record. So, if I look at Eden, and I look at what the Bible tells me, and I think, yeah, it's Felix Culpa. Felix Culpa, the exultet at Easter, O happy fault, O necessary sin of Adam, which gained for us so great a Redeemer. The thought that, actually, well done, Adam. Well done, Eve. Because if you hadn't done what you did, we wouldn't have had Jesus as our Redeemer. We wouldn't have needed a Redeemer. And that's what the early church, with this wonderful Easter hymn, that they grappling with. We're so pleased that Jesus is risen. Jesus died for us. You can't say it without a smile on your face. And it allows you to face life and death, pain, all the other things, the good and the evil of which we are now aware. So if it's a Felix Culpa, a happy fault, you begin to think, well, I don't like talking about the plan of God. You know, some of my colleagues in the Biblical Commission, I was very objective. Usually my comments are quite sort of lightweight, and half of them are from a sort of pastoral perspective. And they talk about the plan of God for marriage. And I said, we should talk about the plan of God. That's not the way. I don't think God has plans. I think God is there, as I've often said in homilies, he's like the dad on the side of the football match, rooting for his kids, who are, or even worse, rugby match, getting themselves massacred. And saying, oh, come on, you can do it, you can, you know. I believe in that kind of a God that wants us to produce. And as deliberately, if he had a plan, was, well, I want to give them a test. From that God testing Abraham, but God tests us. God wants us to, because if without a test we can't achieve our potential. I wonder whether that's the way. Let me finish though, because I do want to include St. Paul. Because St. Paul is the one who does this comparison between the first Adam and the second Adam, between Adam and Christ. Romans chapter 5, notoriously difficult. Sin entered the world through one man, and through sin, death. See? So it's like the book of wisdom. It's not what Genesis says. Genesis doesn't say death comes at that point. But this is what Jewish and Christian faith has come to. Sin comes through Adam, and with sin, death. And death has spread through the whole human race because everyone has sinned. We've all become our own Adam. Verse 15, chapter 5. If through one man's fall many died, all of us die. It is even more certain that divine grace, coming through the one man, Jesus Christ, came to so many as an abundant free gift. We had the effects of Adam's sin. But what Christ has given us is amazing. It's just unbelievable. And we believe it. 1 Corinthians 15:21. Death came through a human being, and in the same way the resurrection from the dead has come through a human being. All die in Adam, but all will be brought to life in Christ. So the revelation of immortality, of the future hope, of the resurrection, of Easter, which is glimpsed, hoped for, thought about, perhaps not in Genesis, but throughout the Psalms and in various other places in the Old Scriptures, is realized through Jesus Christ. We are created by a loving God who places us in a beautiful world that we've got to protect. We must take that seriously. We must listen to what the Spirit is saying to the church and to the world at the present time. We've been given the gift of freedom. We can change things. We know about bad choices. We know about good choices. Jonathan Sacks calls his book To Heal a Fractured World. If Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, 2 and 3, have said to us, this is the way forward, can you imagine what the other thousands of pages of Scripture can say to us? And I said, we can't cope with it all, but we can cope with more than we're coping with at the moment. And if we use above all the lectionary, the Sunday lectionary, to inspire us, I'm going to go deeper into this because I know there are things which can help me and I can pass on. Many of you have responsibilities, whether it's in families, catechesis, teaching, etc. There's so much that we can pass on. And I think this has to be the challenge of the year of the God who speaks. Because it's not only the God who speaks, it's the year of us who listen.